Okay, apologize for the delay. I'm wanting to record this class because a lot of people have asked to have it as a reference for when they go back and maybe do stuff on their own or work with another computer or just want to get more familiar with it. So hopefully this is recording and all the ones and zeros are working in our direction this time. Just want to say, um, I have a little bit of a sore throat, but I don't have COVID. I did test myself this morning. So hopefully I will get through without too bad of a sore throat. Also, I'll keep talking. If not, then I'll just kind of pantomime and we'll kind of lead from there. So one thing I wanted to do is, as I usually like to, is to just start out and to check to see if there are any questions from anything that I went over the last time. No questions? Yes. And if you could tell me your name, in fact, afterwards, why don't we just go around the class again quickly so I can try and get an attempt at your name.
So my name is Anita, and I am brand new to Lightroom.
Yay.
Not to, yeah, exactly, not to photography anything. But when I open it, I start poking around, looking around. I'm missing like a home base key. You know, how do I get back to the normal, whatever, desktop? If there is such a thing. Now I'm, I feel like I'm very much floundering, and that's probably the third day I've ever even opened it.
That's fine.
So that's my question.
Well, just stick around and we'll be covering over the interface today. And so that should take care of things. Okay. So you're Anita, and if we can go in the next row back. Ralph. Okay. Sure.
So I think I'm still a little bit confused between collections and everything else that's not collections.
Okay.
So from what I understand with collections, these are folders that we're creating in Lightroom, and we can organize things that we love, you know, pictures that we really like and we want to reference and edit. What is outside of collections? All of our photos?
Let me kind of get to that in a little bit more detail, but just because it's on your mind right now, folders are where your images are actually stored on your computer. And so you can see on the left-hand side, we have folders, and then we have here I've got my photographs a little bit further down. Actually, they're all just in one folder here. But collections are virtual. They are, I want to say, make-believe. They only exist in the Lightroom catalog. And so they don't reflect of anything else on your hard drive. Does that help out? So folders are where your images live. And I want to say collections is where your images visit. Because an image can be in multiple collections. But you never want to move an image outside of Lightroom once you have, quote, imported it into the program. Absolutely never, ever. In fact, I would like to be able to make that folder hidden from prying eyes so that you don't have any incentive to try to even access it. Does that help out? So the only reason you should ever need to move your images after you have downloaded them is if you are migrating to another hard drive. But otherwise, once you download them, let them be there. Okay. Good question, though. Any other questions? Well, this is a good class to start. The other class was more of a introductions and overview of the program. the advantages, some of the tools that are in that. Now we'll get to dive in firsthand and start working with it. Okay, so does everybody's interface look somewhat similar to this? I want to make sure that everybody is actually in Lightroom Classic and not Lightroom. So if you're kind of scratching your head or it's not looking quite familiar, then you may be in the wrong program. You are in the wrong program. So that is Lightroom, and you want the Lightroom Classic program. Yep. Okay. So what I want to do tonight is just go through some of the changes on the interface. We want to look at preferences. So whenever you get any software, whether it's for your computer or for your smartphone, I always encourage people to go and look at the preferences because there may be a setting that you didn't know about till you've been working in the program for months that would make your life easier. Sometimes it's simply an issue of making the fonts bigger or changing the color of the background so it's easier to read. But there may be other choices that may not be optimally set for how you're using the program. So I encourage you to go ahead and do that first. So one of the first things that I encourage people to do, and unfortunately I don't have that list of setting up Lightroom, so I'll just kind of go at my own pace and usually do a good job of covering everything. So what we want to do is go up. You make sure that you're in the library module. And as I mentioned before in the handouts, I really encourage you to get familiar with the keyboard shortcuts that I've given you because they really make navigating the program a lot easier. Particularly some of the simple keys like G for the grid mode is what I frequently use to be in the library module, and then D for develop to get into the to the develop module. And so, as I mentioned, I probably spend about 98% of my time going between those two modules. So there's a good reason that you want to get familiar with those keyboard shortcuts. So what I want to do up here is I want to make some changes to the interface. And so when we're in the library, so you can hit G if you're not in the library, you want to go up to View and then go down to View Options. It's going to be up on the menu bar at the top toward the right. View Options. Then what you want to do is well, let me get out of here. So what you want to do then is over on the left-hand side, it says 1 and 2. So what you want to do is to click on that 2 to have it go away. And why do I not NTM? I'm about ready to steal their mouse. Why don't they do that?
Anti-fog for your glasses.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and like you want me to do the rest of the once in a while. And we didn't have all these I would usually just ask them 20-something days.
Ah. Okay, there we go. Ah. Oh, wait, come on, get that out of here. Get. There, does that make it a little easier to see? Okay. So what we want to do at the very top, if you don't have this box checked, show grid extras, go ahead and do so. And then what we want to do is click this drop down up at the top and change it from compact cells to expanded cells. And what that did, well, then just bring it back up by going to view and then view options. And so we want to change that to compact, to expanded cells. And what that does is it gives 4 little placeholders above our image in the grid mode that we can have it display useful information, like maybe our exposure and ISO, or the date that we took it, or how we may have changed our exposure from what the camera recommended. The next one down that I recommend is where it says tint grid cells with label colors. The default is 20%. I would recommend changing that to 50%. And simply what that is if you give an image a color code, it's a color that surrounds the thumbnail image. And the 50% is just more prominent and easier to see than 20%. The next, going down a little bit further, is that we want to unclick where it says quick collection markers. The quick collection markers are sort of this ugly gray circle in the upper right-hand corner of your image that you can use to put it in the quick collection. And the quick collection is kind of like an inbox. It's a temporary type of collection. But I just find that I'd rather put an image in and take it out of the quick collection with a keyboard shortcut than to have this ugly gray circle that I may inadvertently click on and put the image in there. The next one that we want to change is a little bit further down under it says compact cells extras, is that we want to uncheck where it says index number. The index number, as far as I can tell, is a superfluous, meaningless number that I have found no use for since the program came out in 2006. So if someone can tell me what it is used for, I'm all ears. A little bit further down, we have the, yes. No, it's not the path, it's just the file name. If you, where are you seeing base name? That's
Right there, yeah. Copy name or file base name. Up and now to your right. Keep going.
this.
And above.
Well, this is for the compact cell extras. And so this would be if you are in the compact cell view. We're in the expanded cell view, so these would give you options to show on the compact cell view. I don't really know, but it's not really important. So I can't tell you for sure, but I don't really know what the difference would be. But a good question. No one has asked that. I'm obviously stumped. I wouldn't worry about it. The file, what's going to come up for the file name is the name of the file. Is going to show there. Okay. Now, there we go. So we've got these compact cell extras, and if you click on them, it's going to pull up this drop-down menu of all kinds of different options that you can change it to. The good news is that you don't need to go back to view, then view options to change these options, to change these. You can simply, when you are in the program here, you could just click on these four different categories above your image, and it would bring the same drop-down list. So if you wanted to change it on the fly, you can go ahead and do so.
Base name is the original file folder file name.
Uh-huh.
And then the copy name would be whatever names you're giving to the selections as you work.
Okay, I'd have to think about that a little bit. Because I don't see how that would be all that useful. Okay, so we can put anything that we want here. You can choose what you would like. My recommendation is probably the file name, although that's not particularly useful, but we can go ahead and do so. And my other recommendation is to put in the capture date and time. And then it's going to be, I guess, about a dozen down from the top of the list. Yeah, that's a good point. No wonder I've spent so much time rummaging through here trying to find things. Yes. Yes. To the right, I've got capture date and time. So it's going to be about a dozen down from the top.
It's way down on the list, there.
Below rate and label. It says capture date and time. Okay, well, you may have an older version of the program. So that's one of the reasons I really encourage people, keep your program up to date so we're all literally on the same page. So it could be that they may have shifted around, but I know that it's in the list. Okay. The next one I recommend, which is useful, is going to be exposure and ISO, and this is going to be down further down on the list. So that will give you your shutter speed, your f-stop, and your ISO. It's definitely there. So. No, it should be exposure and ISO. Just keep looking on the list. And then my recommendation for the last one is going to be the exposure bias. And maybe a little harder for me to find it here. Exposure. Thank you. So what the exposure bias is how far you deviated from what your camera recommended that you expose the image for if you used one of the automatic modes. which I highly recommend. A quick aside, anyone that says, I'm really serious about photography and I only shoot in the manual mode, my recommendation is to nod to them and acknowledge what they've said and turn around and walk away and run as fast as you can. Because you don't get a better image because you spend more time spinning dials on your camera. You get a better image when you are familiar with your camera and you're getting the camera to do as much as you want it to do or can do on its own without having to intervene. So I'm a big fan of the automatic exposure modes. So hopefully you should be as well, because you paid a lot of money for people to drive to work and to figure out how to put it into your camera. So the exposure mode is how far you've deviated and from what the automatic mode recommended. And the reason I feel like it's important is because I do recommend that we import raw images into Lightroom with AutoTone applied. And what AutoTone is going to do is to try to make your ugly looking raw file look nicer by adjusting things like the exposure and the lightest and the darkest part in your photo, so that it looks better than if you bring in the image with no adjustments applied. And so if you bring it in with AutoTone, it's going to try to make images look similar. And if you have two images that look similar, and one says +1 or +2, meaning you gave it 1 or 2 more stops, then it's going to have better quality data in the darker part of the image, in the shadows, where the sensor records less information. So if you need to lighten those shadows, you're going to get a better quality image to work with, because you're going to have more information stored in those dark areas. So if I'm looking at something similar, but one has more exposure, then I will choose that one because I know it's higher quality image. So that's why I recommend exposure bias. I wouldn't worry about that. We can just skip that for right now. Thanks for bringing it to my attention. I probably have never even seen it after the last 15 years or longer. Okay, so if we go up to the top, this is the grid view. If we go one more tab over, we have the loop view. And the loop view is simply when you have one image filling your center of the screen. And the defaults here are fine. You can always change them if you want, and it has the same drop down as what we had before. Just know that the first one is going to be a little bit larger on the image. And I find that the most useful one is going to be the exposure and ISO that I have down here. And so we can cycle through 2 screens of information. And the reason that it's useful is because if I'm looking at an image and it's looking a little soft, I'm going to want to know what my shutter speed is. So if I'm looking at it and it says that it's like 60th of a second, then I know that it's probably soft because my shutter speed was a little bit too low. Not to say that you can't do something with that image. There is now some simply astounding software put out by a company called Topaz Sharpen, where I have been stunned with its ability to take blurry images and make them sharp. I can send that out to people, and I make no money yet on their software, but I'm just simply amazed. And I love to pass on tools that I find in my research, my internet surfing, so to save you time and headaches and energy. So that's why the exposure bias is really or rather the exposure and ISO is helpful. And again, you can go back and change it if you find that there are other things that are useful. Perhaps you may want to have the focal length of your lens showing, so that you want to know, well, how long did I zoom my lens out for? What was the actual effective focal length that I used for a particular image? And so you can go ahead and put that in down here from the drop down as well too. Well, you can, have one or the other display on the screen, but the easiest way to cycle through them is to hit the I for information key on your keyboard. That's the information that's going to be displayed on your image in the loop view. Yes. Well, don't worry about it. I'll demonstrate it. And that should be fine here. And so once we've got those, we can go ahead and click the X to get out of this screen. And now what we want to do is we want to go into the general preferences of the program. And so they're located in slightly different places depending on if you're on a Mac or a PC. And that's really about the only difference between these two programs on the two different platforms. So if you're on a Mac computer, you want to go up to the menu bar on the left-hand side where it says Lightroom, and then go down to Preferences. If you're on a PC, then you would go to Edit, and then go to Preferences. Are you on a Mac or a PC? On a Mac, then you would go up to the top in the left corner where it says Lightroom, and then click and then go down to where it says Preferences. Okay. So is everybody in the preference screen now? Okay. So the good news is there's not a lot of things that we really need to change in the preferences, but again, it's just good to get familiar with what we have here so you can change it. So where's my mouse? Okay. So at the very top, the English, I'm assuming that you want to use language. If you want to be working on one of your other languages, then be my guest. But I'm still working on English, so I'll keep it on English. Underneath that, it says show splash screen during startup. I don't need an advertisement for the program, so I just shut that off. The next one down, it's when starting up, use this catalog. Ideally, you are only using one catalog. The only time that I would recommend most people have more than one catalog is if you are traveling and you have another computer that you are taking and it's not your main Lightroom computer. Then you may have a travel catalog and that you may want to go back and forth between them. But generally it says when starting up, use this catalog, and so it has the default there. And so you don't really need to change it, but if you were inadvertently opening up a wrong catalog, and I've seen this happen, people say, well, my catalog has changed, I don't know what happened, and I look and I see that they're using a backup catalog. So they ended up turning their backup catalog for their main catalog for the last several months. So you can leave it as it is or change it to something else in the drop-down. There's the option that says load most recent catalog or prompt me when starting up. But probably just keeping it as the catalog that you're in is going to be fine. The next one down, it says show import dialog when a memory card is detected. I will leave that to you. Sometimes I find that to be a little too aggressive. Like if I insert a USB drive, it will think that it's a memory card and it will open up the program. So I've kind of go back and forth. Lately, I think I have had that checked because usually I'm using memory cards more than USB drives, and so it's convenient to just go ahead and have it open up. I'm sorry, what? You could go ahead and check it. Yeah, and then if you find it's obnoxious, then turn it off. Not too much else that we need to change here. Are there any people that shoot both RAW and JPEG at the same time for every picture that you take? Okay, so a couple things. One, if you do that, know that you will have twice as many images to manage. My recommendation is if you are not comfortable making adjustments to raw images, shoot both raw and JPEG. And then as you get more comfortable with working with the program, switch over to only shooting raw files. Because you can, of course, always make JPEGs from raw files. And the whole point of working in Lightroom is to add your interpretation to the image and not just depend on JPEGs when you export or use your images. Now, know that Lightroom by default will only import the raw files if you take RAW and JPEG for each image. If you want them to bring in both images, you need to check where it says treat JPEG files next to RAW files as separate photos. So obviously they didn't have liberal arts majors writing the dialog box for some of these things. So it would be easier if they just said import both at the same time instead of just RAWs. So you can go ahead and check that if you want to go ahead. Yes?
I don't want to have to convert raw. You see what I mean? So I can take a bunch of pictures and I just want to email one to someone like that night, just to show them what it was. It's not like art or anything.
Well, it's nothing you have to do. It's not like you have to go out in the garage and grab the shovel and do anything. The program will do it for you. So if you select a raw file and you want to email it to somebody, it will convert it to a JPEG and then just email it that way.
So you'd recommend,
Well, if you shoot RAW and JPEGs at the same time, then it's only going to bring in the RAW if you uncheck that box. You might as well just uncheck it in your camera and only shoot RAW files then. Yes, absolutely. Yes. The only time that I can think of shooting only JPEGs is if someone says, "Oh, bring your camera to the party and take some pictures, will you?" And you're kind of like, oh, "Okay." And if you don't really want to process them and you want something quick out of the camera for memories that you're not really thinking about hanging on the wall and putting your name underneath. Yeah. Yeah, and you can do all that in Lightroom. Yeah. No. Okay. Nothing else really I think that we need to change here. Those are all fine. Under presets, again, nothing really that you need to change. The only thing that I can think of for most people, you are going to have your catalog on one computer. There are some that are fortunate that may have two houses and they travel back and forth between them frequently. If you are fortunate in that position, you may want to have your catalog and your images on an external hard drive and simply swap them back and forth between the computers. If you do that, then you would probably want to check this box that says store presets with this catalog right down here. And so if you made a preset, it's usually going to be stored in the computer and not with the catalog. If you did have one hard drive that contained your images and your catalog where you swapped it back and forth, you would want your presets to come with you because you wouldn't want to get to a new place and say, well, where'd all my presets go? So that's the only thing that time that I can think that you'd want to say store presets with this catalog. You'll probably run out of space.
Yeah, so that's why I have the separate drive.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much how I'm going to operate. Is that reasonable to think that I'm going to operate that way? Or do I have to?
Absolutely, yes. If your main computer is a laptop, then you will likely run out of space soon, unless you got one of those new Macs that have an 8 terabyte hard drive, in which case you probably don't have money to buy camera equipment anymore. No. Yeah. Because I'm just talking about if this is your main computer for your Lightroom work, then it's not really going to make any difference. Another question? Yeah. Boy, I'd have to dig into this a little bit deeper. Um, I've actually kind of glazed over when this came out a little bit ago. You can set things up so that you have presets for specific cameras or different things supplied for particular cameras. I haven't gone to that far of kind of calibrating everything to work in that way. So I can look into it a little bit further, but I've just basically have ignored it. Okay. Again, not much else here. The next one, external editing. The defaults here are fine. So you should have, the file format is TIFF if you're sending something to Photoshop. So this will only show up if you've also installed Photoshop. My preference is change it to PSD. Functionally, TIFF and PSD are identical in terms of the quality of information that they can store and being able to work in layers. I just like to have photos that, that I send to Photoshop to be labeled Photoshop files, because then I know that I've worked with them in Photoshop. I have other programs that will only take a TIFF file, so I know that if they've gotten a TIFF extension that I've used that program. So that's just my own preference. So either TIFF or PSD is fine if you use that as an external editor. Hopefully the default, what you have is color space is ProPhoto RGB. And simply put, the color space is like a balloon. The bigger the balloon is, the more colors it will hold. And so ProPhoto is the largest color space that we can work in. And my feeling is that you generally want to work with as much data as you can when you're working with shooting or editing your images, and then get rid of it at the last minute when you don't need it. So you would not want to have, say, a JPEG in a ProPhoto color space. That would be, you'd want to convert it to what's called the sRGB color space, which is a lot smaller, but it's what the web and the internet work and understand and what browsers expect. So the default, leave it for ProPhoto. And again, the bit depth, we have a choice of either 16 or 8-bit. So 16-bit is going to be substantially more data to work with. And so if we're doing editing in Photoshop or another program, we want the most amount of data. So keep that on 16-bit. And then the resolution here doesn't really matter because you're sending pixels over to Photoshop. And so that's just going to be how the program interprets the size of the image based on what you're calling the resolution of the particular image. And so as we get into printing, that may make a little bit more sense, because your image is just actually going to be a couple thousand pixels by a couple thousand pixels. There's no inherent resolution to it. The resolution means how much information do you want to be in a small space when you print out your image. So when we print, ideally we want to be around 300 DPI, and that's what this resolution stands for. So if we were to, say, put in a smaller number, then Photoshop would think that we have a larger image because we're saying, well, we only need 180 dots per inch or pixels per inch, and so we can make a much larger image. So if that all went over your head, that's perfectly fine. just know that the default of 240 is going to be fine. Next up here, we have file handling. And again, these defaults are fine. There's nothing that I would really think of changing here. The next one, over the interface. I do like to make the main window, the fill color, darker gray. And you can change that another way in the program too. Know that it's simply the area around the photo when you are in the program. And the reason I like the darker gray instead of the default medium gray is because I find the medium gray, and I can just jump over quickly so you get an idea of what I'm talking about here. I'll just show you it another time, but it's just the area around the photo. And the lighter gray, I find it's too light. So know that your eye is going to be drawn to light, bright, and white first. So if you're working on a darker image, I feel like my eye keeps going off to the side of the image to the lighter gray. And so for me, it's just a stylistic preference of preferring to have a darker gray. A couple other things that we may want to change here, down if we go down a little bit, under the film strip, uncheck where it says show index number. Again, that's that meaningless number. And then I would probably also click where it says tweaks down at the bottom. It says zoom, click point to center. So that will allow us to zoom in when we click on a certain part of on a specific part of the image. And then one other thing that I may want to mention here is the font size in the upper right. You may want to change that. The drop down is going to be a little bit different depending on if you're on a Mac or a PC. And depending on the resolution of your screen. So I tend to like a larger on this particular computer because it's a high resolution screen, and so it makes everything look small. But you can change it on your computer depending on what feels comfortable for you. The next one over is called performance. And if you look at the options here, the default, I believe, is auto. And if you change it to custom, then you may, if you have a newer computer, then you probably have a box underneath here that you can go ahead and check. And if you have a graphic card that doesn't conform or it can't be used by the program, it will be grayed out. And so Lightroom is no speed queen. And so what they're trying to do is to unload some of the processing power from your central processor to your graphic processor. I don't know that I see a particular amount of difference, but you know, it's always fun to feel like you're checking a box and it's making the program run faster. So I would go ahead and change that from auto to custom. And then going down a little bit further, you can check this box that says use smart previews instead of originals for image editing. It sounds a little bit confusing, but basically a smart preview is another type of preview that we can generate when we import our images. And so what the advantage of smart previews will do, if you have a laptop and your images are stored on an external drive, is that you can work on those images even if that hard drive is not connected, because you have created smart previews that are stored in the catalog. The only time that may make a little bit of a difference is if you're enlarging your image to 100%, which you shouldn't need to do very often when you're doing things like noise reduction or sharpening, and then you would then not be able to see the full resolution of your original image. But for most cases, because I don't care about hard drive space, even on my desktop computer, I'll go ahead and generate smart previews as well too. So I would go ahead and check that. The next one over is one that we'll come back to for the most part. This is Lightroom Sync. And so these are images that you may have shot originally or uploaded if you only use the Lightroom version of the two Lightroom programs instead of Lightroom Classic. They have been stored up in the cloud. You can download them to your computer by telling them where you want them to go. And so you would check that box.
Those are only for syncing if you've used an older version.
Well, not so much an older version if you use the non-classic version.
Oh, okay.
The other reason that you would use this, which I'll go into a little bit more detail, and this is for bringing in images from your smartphone. And so what I want you to do, think first before we change anything here, is to determine if you want to download your smartphone images into your Lightroom catalog. And I really hope the answer is yes, because they are important and valuable and should be managed. The other thing I want you to think about is, do you want to put those images in a separate folder, or do you want them to be combined with your dedicated camera? And it's kind of up to you. For me, I decided I wanted to keep them separate. And the only time that I'll combine my smartphone images with my other dedicated camera is if I'm on vacation. And then I would go ahead and put them in with my vacation photos. So what you'd want to do, and the reason I don't want to go through this now, because first we have to make sure that we've created a folder called Master Photos where we want our images to go. And then you need to decide whether you want to create a folder within that for smartphone images or not. And, okay, so then what you'd want to do is click where it says Choose, navigate to where you created that Master Photos folder, and then create another folder underneath that and call it like iPhone or smartphone photos or Android. Yes, otherwise it will be grayed out. And then navigate to that Master Photos folder that I recommended that people create before class, if you've done that. So you'd have to go back and do that. Or to do that at the same time, you could create a folder called Master Photos, then create another folder underneath that and call that smartphone, and then select that folder. And then after you do that, you want to check underneath. It says Use subfolders formatted by capture date. And then my recommendation is that you choose the fourth one down. And to do it by, why doesn't this come in? To choose the fourth one down, and you want to choose numerically because you don't want to choose alphabetically, because then you're going to have April appear before January. So my recommendation is that you use numbers. And I recommend that you simply use year and month, because if you do year, month, and day, you're going to get a ridiculously long string of folders that aren't, I think, particularly useful for most of the work that we do. Okay. And then the other ones aren't particularly useful or helpful. are the display and network. I haven't really even looked at those for a while. But what we want to do then is to jump back over to that tab that says performance at the top here. And then we want to go down where it says go to catalog settings. If you may be in an older version of Lightroom or you don't see where it says catalog settings under performance, you can always go back up to the menu where you went to get your preferences and just choose catalog settings instead. So we have 3 tabs here. The first one is general, and it says backup, catalog, and then the default is once a week when exiting Lightroom, and that should be sufficient. Ideally, before I forget, if you didn't see my notice, today is World Backup Day, and so it was started many years ago as a way of reminding people how fragile digital images and other memorabilia is, and to think about having a backup strategy. And so today, lots of hard drives are on sale and memory cards are on sale. So if you haven't come up with a backup strategy that ideally includes backing up to another hard drive on hopefully a daily basis, and then to also have an offsite backup, then I would encourage you to do so and be part of the World Backup Day. Because as I've said, digital images are really fragile, and data loss is forever. And so in the material that I sent out today, I gave a couple recommendations for some programs. So I do have a program called SyncBack Free, and this is all going to be in the material that I sent out today through Google Classroom, so you don't really need to take notes. The SyncBack Free is a program I've used for years. I wish it didn't work so well because I feel guilty about using it because I haven't paid for their other program. But what this does is I tell it to back up either drives or folders from one hard drive to another, and it does it for me automatically every night. So every night, one hard drive is being backed up automatically. In addition to that, I also use a service called Backblaze, and Backblaze costs $70 a year, and it will back up all the drives that you have connected to one computer. So if you've got 20 hard drives hooked up, then it will back up 20 hard drives. And I did send out a link for that too. And in full disclosure, I do get a little commission because I was recommending it to so many people and I use it myself that I thought I might as well be an affiliate with them. So just know that it's been a good service. Whenever I've had a question and I've contacted their support, they've been really attentive, and so it's given me a lot of peace of mind because I used to just swap a hard drive back and forth, but you know, we're living in earthquake country, we're living in fire country, so it just seems like it was silly not to pay for that service with all the other expenses we have. Yeah. No. That's the beauty of Backblaze. There are other services that do have different tiers or different caps, but for pack rats like me, the Backblaze is really ideal because I don't have to worry about exceeding 2 terabytes or so of backing things up. Okay. It could be a desktop, it can be a laptop, any computer you designate. Yeah. So if you plug in the hard drives and you check the box, it will back it up. Does that make sense? Okay. The next one over. So I encourage you to say once a week when Lightroom exits, because if you do have a backup strategy where your files are automatically backed up every night, then you've already created an ongoing backup every night of your your Lightroom catalog. So it's only being a little bit redundant, which is not a bad thing, to say back it up once a week. Next, we have file handling. And hopefully the default here should say auto. And what that is going to do is when you import your images, it's going to make previews for you to look at your images. And so it's going to look at your screen size and make previews of that based on your screen size. So ideally, you should just have auto checked and it will be fine. Yeah, the previews do take up space. The catalog doesn't take up a ton of space, but the previews will definitely kill you. So that's fine. Okay. And then the image quality and discarding the one-to-one previews, which do take up even more space, automatically after 30 days is fine too. The last one, the tab that says metadata, there is one box here that I think is the most important checkbox that is not checked by default when you are working in the program, and it says automatically write changes to XMP. And your first response should be, huh, what does that mean? So what the XMP is, it's a small text file that resides next to your images. And that will contain your last settings that you used in Lightroom to adjust your image, keywords, and star ratings, I believe. The idea being, if worst case scenario, your computer crashes, your backups crash, everything, your catalog is a complete disaster, it's corrupted, whatever, it will allow you to re-import your images into a new Lightroom catalog and save all the edits that you have done. So otherwise, if something catastrophic were to happen to your catalog and your backups, then you would only have your raw files and you would have to start all over with all your editing in Lightroom. So it's kind of like an extra insurance little policy. And so my recommendation is that you definitely check that. So like I said, if something catastrophic were to happen, you could create a new Lightroom catalog, re-import your images, and then all your edits would still be intact. So that's definitely a useful thing. So any questions there? Yeah. I don't generally worry about that because I don't use what's called the DNG format. I think that is particular to using DNG files. Most camera companies don't use that as a default file format, and Adobe is trying to use that as a universal file format. So I don't even think about it because I know Lightroom isn't able to touch my raw files, so I just ignored it. Another question? Yeah. Can you show me file handling again? Because I just had to restart Lightroom. Sure. It will be weird. I can guarantee it. So I would check, make sure and just say that this one is auto, and it should be by default. Now, the only reason that I would think that you would want to override this is if you have a travel catalog and your main computer has a larger or a higher resolution screen than your laptop, and you know that you're going to migrate the images over to your main computer. So as an example, my main computer has a high resolution screen, but if I were using one of my older laptops, it would want to generate just a smaller, probably 2000 pixels. So I would override that, knowing that I want the images, the previews created to fit my larger monitor. And that's really about the only time I can think of that you would really need to override it.
Under the performance tab, preview generation setting, generate previews in parallel. That means just as a background mode or something?
Yeah, I think I may have skipped over that. So yeah, let's see under performance. Yes, generate previews in parallel. Yeah. So what that will do is, I think it will allow me to work on images before it's generated all the previews. So again, another thing to try and speed up the program a little bit. On which one? There are some things here, like the camera raw cache, the defaults. I mean, again, the thing is, if you increase these numbers and you are on a laptop, know that you are going to be chewing up more of your hard drive space. And that's a kind of a premium with VIIR working on a laptop. And I don't know that you're going to necessarily see a significant performance improvement. So you could increase the defaults from, I think they are like 1 or 3 or something like that. Yeah, if you have a desktop and you have a lot of hard drive space, sure, throw in like 50 gigabytes or so. Like I say, I'll do anything to make it feel like the program's more responsive. So that's about the only thing else I can think of. Yeah, change it to custom and then use the GPU. Yeah, you want to check that. Yeah, check anything you can. So it's like, okay. So I think that's about all that that we really need to change in the preferences. Now there's a couple other tweaks that I want to do. So if you go to the right side on the palette, you're where it's this darker ridge here. What you want to do is to right-click on it, and I keep forgetting the Mac. I believe it's either a 2-finger tap on the trackpad, or I believe it's the Command key, and you want to right-click that, and then you want to choose what's called Solo Mode. And what Solo Mode does is it only allows, with the exception of the histogram in the upper right corner, it only allows one of the panels to be open at a time. Yeah, let me actually make. So if we go over to where one of these bars are, so if you right click on it or do a 2-finger tap, choose Solo Mode. Now, I don't recommend that you do it on the left side of the library, because you, especially if you've worked in the program previously, you may want to have access to both folders and collections at the same time, so that you can take images from folders and then put them into your collections. But I find that if we go over to the develop mode, it's definitely very helpful to do the solo mode. So again, right click on it or command click, and then choose solo mode. And again, with the exception of the histogram, if I'm in the basic panel, and if I am like, say, in the effects panel here, and then I go into, say, like the basic panel, then it will close the panel behind me, so I don't have a whole long list of open panels that I have to scroll through to get to the different tools. We were in library, so to get into the develop, you can hit D, or just to click up here at the top. Then go to where it says any of these panel headings like tone curve or HSL or color grading, right click on it. Why does it come out? And you want to choose, won't let me do it. Go to a panel here on the right-hand side. Right click on, just listen. Right click on it or command click on it if you're on a Mac. And develop. Just listen to the directions. Don't tell me where you are, because it's not going to really help me up here. Just go to the develop module, go to any of the dark panels, headings on the right-hand side. And then either right-click on it or command-click on it, and then you should see choices that say either customize development panel, show all, solo mode, expand all, or collapse all. It's control click, thanks. Let me remember that. Yeah. Here, let's come here and do control. Click on it, choose solo mode, right there. Yeah. So what solo mode will do, it will only allow one of these panels to be open at a time, with the exception of the histogram. So if I didn't have solo mode engaged and I had all these panels open, then it would take me a while to scroll through all these open panels. But if I have solo mode enabled, then it will close the panel I was in previously when I open up a new one. So I don't have to scroll through a whole long list of open panels. Does that make sense now? Okay. And you'll see that solo mode is also available in some of the other places as well, too, in the program. The other panels, as well as the import dialog box, too. Yeah, and I'll go over that when we jump into the develop module, because that's the only module where you can change the order. Okay, the next thing I want to do is I want to go into the identity plate. So if, again, if you're in the Mac, go up to Lightroom and then go to where it says identity plate. If you're on a PC, go to edit and then scroll down to identity plate setup. And all of this is in the handouts that I gave you as well, too. So after the first page where we've got, I think it says something like setting up Lightroom. Yeah, last handouts. So it's all in there. So we're just going over it together. So we want to go into that identity plate setup. And then what we want to do is on the left-hand side where it says identity plate, click the drop-down, and the default is going to be Adobe ID, and we want to change it to be personalized. So once we've got that, you can format on the left-hand side whatever you want to call your catalog, or you want to put in your photography business name. Whatever you would like to do, like word processing, you can change the font, you can change the size, you can select it and give it a color code. But what I like to do in particular is on the right-hand side, I like to color code the active module that I'm in. So if you look to the far right, you'll see that there are two little boxes here. Well, let me scroll over. There are, I lost my mouse. Come on, there we go. There we go. There are these two little boxes. So the one on the left is going to be the active module that you're in. So if you click on that, it will bring up your computer's color picker. And so my recommendation is that you pick a color that you like that is not too dark.
What panel you're in? Are you in preferences right now?
No, I'm in the identity plate setup. So if you're on a Mac, you go up to Lightroom and then go down to plate setup. And then change it from the default, which is Adobe ID, to personalized. No, just the left one. Yeah. And the one on the right is just the inactive module, and I'm fine with it just gray if you want to change it to something else. And one of the things that you can also do is the default, I find, is a little bit small for the panels up at the top. So you can click this drop down and then choose a different font size. And so that just kind of makes it a little bit easier to see the panel headings and where you are in the program.
And the left-hand box, yours says catalog, mine came up with my name.
Yeah, you can put anything you can select it.
Where's that gonna end up being?
It's just going to show up here in the upper left-hand corner. No, the color on the right-hand side is going to be for the active module that we are in. So if you look here, I'll just cancel out of this. Look here at the top, you'll see that develop is in red. So that's the active module that I'm in. Now know that we can create more than one identity plate, and they can be used in different parts of the program, like in slideshows and when we are printing. So this is going to be fine just for working in the program. Everyone good with that? Okay. If you have not listened to anything that I have said at all during this class and the previous class, I'm okay with that. But listen to this, because this is really important. This thing down here is called the toolbar. The keyboard shortcut for the toolbar is T. But T does not stand for toolbar, it stands for torture. Because at some point, you will inadvertently hit the T and you will wonder where your toolbar went. And if you, well, just to let you know, when it happened to me years ago, I said, well, I guess the program is just kind of messed up. So I shut the program down and started it up. And it didn't come back. And then I thought, well, the program's just corrupted. So I uninstalled and reinstalled the program. And it still didn't come up. And I'm getting a little frustrated here. And so I go out on a forum and try and find a Lightroom forum, and I said, my toolbar is gone. What happened to it? And then someone, I go through the registration and confirmation, and then someone writes back and says, hit the T key. And it came back. So my recommendation is that you hit this T key like 300 or 400 times just to get familiar with it. And as I said, it's not just here, but it's in other parts of the program as well too. And why they have it, I have no idea, because it doesn't give you an appreciable amount of real estate to work with. So I just want to give you a heads up that if you are missing it or missing it somewhere else in the program, hit the T key. Now, we can also change what shows up in the toolbar depending on which view we're in. So if I go ahead and hit G for the grid mode, and so now you can see that I have the expanded cells, so I have some information above the image that may be useful or helpful. And if I wanted to change this, I don't need to go back up to view and then view options. I can just click right here in this view and change it on the fly. So that can be helpful. Sometimes I want to know, like, well, which is the large image? Because sometimes if you're looking at two images and they're both JPEGs, they can look identical, and one can be 100 megabytes and the other can be 200 kilobytes, meaning a much smaller size file, and they will look identical on the screen. So sometimes being able to change that, depending on what you're doing, can be useful. So we can change what's actually on this toolbar as well too, depending on what mode we're in. So why don't you hit the G key to get into the grid mode, and then if you go on the far right-hand side, you can click here, and then down on the far end of the toolbar, there's a drop down here, and now you can click and choose what things that you'd want to show. So there's a couple things that I will uncheck. So as an example, I want to keep the view modes and the painter tool and the sorting, but I would never use the flagging or the rating on the toolbar to rate or flag my images. I use the keyboard shortcuts because they're a lot easier to use. So I uncheck those, and I usually don't need to rotate, and I don't need the navigate. So I uncheck those, and those are going to be particularly important to choose wisely if you're working on a laptop, because you're going to have limited real estate to work with. Yes, I would keep those. And I do have color labels and slideshow. You can keep thumbnail size if you have the space for it. Yeah, it's an easy way of giving it a color label by just clicking on the toolbar. Sometimes I'll color code my images. If I've sent it to a few different programs and I'm comparing them and I forget like which is the one that I just sent to a particular program to help keep them straight. Now if we go and click E to get into the loop view, then we can also click the toolbar drop down, and you can see that we may have a few different choices to work with. Pretty much the same. But you may want to then go ahead and check or uncheck some things there as well too. The same. I would uncheck. I would keep the sorting and uncheck the flagging and rating. and navigate and probably add the slideshow. And as you get more familiar with the program, you'll get familiar with what you want to work with. Yeah. Here? Yes. Yeah. That's pretty much intended if you're working with two monitors. I haven't tried that on a single screen. Would that drive you nuts? Hmm? Mine's not showing up somewhere somehow. That's going to have to do with facial recognition. You probably aren't going to need it. Okay, now I think I got myself in trouble here. So I think I may be. If I can get to it. No, that's going to be getting me out of my screen recording program. Let's see if I can get. Can I move that? That's good enough. Okay, that worked. Great.
And did you have grid overlay checked on that?
I don't remember.
Toolbar thingy? No.
Grid overlay. No, because that's just going to put some stupid grid, I think, on.
Okay, no.
Yeah. Oh, get out of here.
And tell me again why you want or would not want draw face region?
Because the program will likely do it for you when you need to do it for under facial recognition. Oh, now how do I get back? NTM. See if I do this. Okay. It keeps wanting to go back. Okay. Now, another thing that's really important, and it's really kind of stupid that they do this. You can filter your images based on colors and flags and stars, but you would never know it because they hide it from you. So what you have to do is to click this where it says filters. Why they do this, I have no idea, because the whole point of the program is to organize your images. So if we go ahead and click that, it's kind of like a spring, and it will pop out here. Oh, why do I keep getting... Now I can't get out of the second window view. Oh. Hmm? Yeah, that's what I thought. Let me just click. Yeah. Oh, shoot, I did that again. Okay. So now we have the ability to filter our images based on flag status and stars and color labels. The only problem is Adobe, unfortunately, hasn't listened to me over these many years, and my preference is that if you could color code these filters, so when they're engaged, you could see it because it would be color coded. So we have 3 flags that we work with viewing our images or sorting our images: flagged, unflagged, and rejected. Unfortunately, they're almost impossible to view, and I've been staring at these since 2006. So what we can do is to create a preset for some of the different views that we use to look at our images. So there are some presets already, but they're not really grouped together the way that I would like to have them grouped. Yes. Yeah, that's fine. No, don't check anything right now. Now I'm having trouble getting it out of that second screen. Okay. Oh, what am I doing here? Trying to get my film strip back. Why is that window? There we go. Okay. I think it also gets a little bit crazy when I've got the computer hooked up to the screen projector. It just gets a little crazy. So what we want to do is if we click the first one, and so first, I may have to restart or something. I'm not going to be able to show you this. I don't know. Maybe that will turn it off. Oh, it just keeps wanting to go back to it. See, I haven't dealt with this on a laptop. How do I get out of here? So this is duplicating what I've got. I'm going to just see if shutting down will take care of this or not. I don't think it will, but we can try. So what we want to do with these filters is we want to create presets to view our images in different ways. And I think the problem is my screen recording program is, let's get out of here. Will that do it? Okay. So what we want to do is I'm going to click the first one is going to be for flag photos. And when we do that, we should see for a split second it says flagged photos. So then what we want to do is we want to save this view as a preset. So we'll go over to where it says on the far right side where it says the custom filter and click the drop down and then go down to the bottom and say save current setting as a new preset. And we want to put a period like you would put at the end of the sentence, and we'll call this flagged. So if you can see that, we'll just call this flagged. And then I'll say create. Yes. Yes.
Please go back one, where are you?
Dot flagged. Yes. So we'll do that again, except right now we've got the flags, the first one checked. We're going to check the second one, and when we do for a split second on the screen, it will say flagged and unflagged photos. So you see where it says flagged and unflagged photos? So now what we want to do is to do that again, go back to the custom filters, and then also say save current setting as a new preset, and we'll call this one dot flagged slash unflagged. And then say create. The period will group them together so that they're not just thrown in the list here alphabetically. Because we can also make some other presets, like maybe you will create a preset that is only of your black and white photos or something like that. Then we want to group these together, but principally I'm going to use these to look at the flag status of images. And so when I do that, I'll go ahead and uncheck the first flag, and now it's going to say only unflagged photos. And then again, I'll click the drop down, same thing as before, say save as current as a new preset, and I'll call this one dot unflagged. So the reason being that to review our images, we're going to go through either looking at our flagged and our unflagged photos, with the idea being that if I've rejected something, I don't want to have to look at it. So I usually will look at my photos as flagged and unflagged status. And so if I hit something with an X to reject it, it will disappear from view. It will not be deleted from the computer, but I simply don't need to look at it. Then when I go through the process of reviewing my images and I flag my images for the better images, then I will say, show me only the unflagged photos, and I will remove those from that particular quick collection view, with the idea being the only photos I truly care deeply about are the flagged photos. So I will then remove the unflagged photos from view, and then I will switch my view and say, show me the flagged photos. These are the photos that I put into collections that I will give keywords to, and the ones that I want to work on further. Flagged and unflagged. Yeah. So when we get these, yes. So we can either access them by clicking here under the drop down, and then you can see the flag, the flagged and unflagged, and it looks like I didn't do one for unflagged. So generally, flagged are those images that we want to spend more time with. The pics, yeah. If I called it what? Yeah, you could call it Bill or whatever. It's still going to be a preset for what you dialed into it. So you can have them incorrect. So that's the thing. So you want to check them to make sure that they're going to show you the flagged and unflagged, and the unflagged photo. So you want to just test them out. Now, once you've got those, you can also, I believe, right-click on the filters themselves, and then they will show up. So it's just easy to then say, show me my flagged and unflagged photos or my flagged photos. And so it will, the flags are really the basis of determining what are the better images that we want to work with.
So I hope you recording all of this to go over at our leisure.
Now, one other thing that I could do is I could send you these presets and tell you where to put them in the program, but I don't know if that would be any easier or not. So it would basically tell you where to navigate into the preferences of Lightroom and where to save these 3 presets. So I'm not sure that that's going to be any easier than just simply clicking on the flag that you want and then saving it as a preset. Yep. No, that's fine. Now, sometimes people may want to see the rejected photos. I don't. If I've rejected them, I just don't really want to see them again. So I'm bad enough with trash picking as it is. I don't need to trash pick my own recycle bin. So I think that takes care of a lot of the interface and the preferences. So we looked at the preferences. We set up the identity plate setup. We went to the view options. We did the flags. So we did get done a bit, and like telling me my computer wants to go back to sleep. And so I think that does a pretty good job of getting us up to the next step, which is where we'll start on Tuesday, which is to create an import preset. So before Tuesday, if you have not done so already, make sure that you have created a directory, a folder, where you want your images to go. And call it master photos, and it can be either on an internal drive or an external drive. But just generally, it's going to be the place where you want your images to permanently exist. So any other questions before we wind up for the night? Yeah. Good. And you're going to know even more. By the time you get done with this class, I'm hoping that the organizational part of it will be like, well, gosh, yeah, of course. How else could it be any other way? Or that makes a lot of sense. And I know when you initially start a program, it's easy to get overwhelmed with it. So I think by like looking at the program, setting up these preferences, get familiar with it, and spend some time looking through the program before class, just to get more familiar with things. And so that will help. As I like to say, practice makes proficiency. Yes?
Are you familiar with Adobe Bridge?
Yes.
And what is the difference between Bridge
Adobe Bridge is an, oh, let me just plug in my computer before it dies here. It is an old, antiquated precursor to Lightroom. So once you have Lightroom, there is never any reason to say or utter the word bridge, let alone open up the program.
Because I just saw that I was subscribed to Bridge 22.
Yeah, uninstall it because you're using Lightroom to manage your images. Great. Any other questions? Sure.
So if I create a file and have it on my external drive, and come to class next time, that's good enough? I shouldn't have anything on into Lightroom yet?
Correct. I'll send it out, but next time, come with probably about a dozen or 2 dozen images that you can import into Lightroom, and then once we create the import preset, we'll start to go through the process of reviewing our images and flagging them and go through that first flow chart of downloading images into Lightroom. So have images, about 2 dozen images or just to work with so that we can start to bring in and get familiar with the practice. You can, they can be on a folder, it can be on a memory card that you haven't imported yet. Yeah, they can be in either one. Sure. As long as you have a card reader. Sure. Great. All right, have a good weekend. I think we'll get some nice weather, unfortunately. And go out and take some great pictures, and we can work with them next week. All right, see ya. Okay. Okay. Let me just shut this down for a second.